It's a bonus episode of Not the Top 20 podcast, and that's because, well, in the last week or so, 1/6 of the Championship have been looking for a new manager, and that alone deserves its own episode. We want to spend some time talking through these four clubs. Outside of the transfer window, nothing gets George Elek more alive than managerial vacancies. He likes the rumours, he likes the reporting, he likes the movement in the betting markets, and he loves following the strong gut instinct reactions that fans have when they see certain names linked with their club's vacancy. No, not him, anyone but him. And we've had 4 such scenarios running concurrently, George Elek. You really can't beat it in November.
I've absolutely loved it. It has been... I used to watch every single episode of Neighbours every day through my teens. And this is as close as it's come to being obsessed over the trials and tribulations of a group of Australian people between the ages of 4 and 70. It's been wild to see all these vacancies come up at the same time. Amazing that kind of the main character, the man who was basically favourite for every single job when the markets were first released, in Gary O'Neill, seemingly isn't going to get any of them. It's been great that we had one example where a club had basically appointed a manager, but that manager had yet to even been muttered by a single fan about a prospect of becoming manager of that club. Another incredible poaching. It's just been fantastic. And I often get frustrated about how transfers can dominate football parlance and how sometimes, it seems that the transfers are more important than the football. But then I realise I'm just as bad as them because managers are my transfers. I love it.
So we're going to talk about Southampton and their search for a replacement for Will Still. We'll talk about Norwich City, the only one who, as we record, have confirmed their new head coach, and it's Philippe Clement. And he has been tasked with taking them out the relegation zone and beyond with a 3.5-year contract. And most notably, the least leakiest club that I've seen in a while. It was reported that Norwich were going to hire a manager, and at that point all the locals still didn't have the name, which is something I haven't seen for a long time. Well done, Norwich, if only for not having any leaks. We'll talk about Swansea City and we'll talk about Middlesbrough, and there's one name we'll be saying a lot, because if Gary O'Neill felt like he might be the main character in the first episode, shall we say, of this dramatic series and soap opera, there's actually one name that we've been saying over and over and over again. What the Hellberg? Kim Hellberg. Why Kim Hellberg? Well, because it seemed like he was nailed on to be appointed as Swansea City's head coach, in part because when Alan Sheehan, the departed manager, first got the job on a permanent basis, it was Kim Hellberg who was at the forefront of the club's mind to appoint a manager. Had they appointed one externally, had Sheehan not done such a good job as interim, that they decided to keep the blinkers on and give him a longer go at it. He was also in the odds for the Norwich City vacancy, but he wasn't, at least at various points, he was not anywhere on the list of next managers for Middlesbrough until it was reported early on Monday morning that, in fact, Kim Hellberg was not flying to the UK to be appointed Swansea City manager, but rather diverting himself to the northeast to be the new Middlesbrough manager. It genuinely sounds like the sort of dramatic spin on this tale is actually how it played out. It genuinely sounds as if Swans thought they had him, thought he was going to be their new head coach, and he's left them for a sexier option. They've been gazumped by Middlesbrough, and that'll be tough to take for Swansea. We'll get back to them later, but just in terms of trying to provide a bit of background around Hellberg, understanding that for some of these guys we are not the world-renowned experts in them, but have done a fair amount of reading up on Hellberg for some time now. His name's been brought up in kind of smart football Euro-specific circles as a bright young coach. 37-year-old, Swedish, no professional career. He's one of them. Cut him and he bleeds coaching. And it is quite the CV he's had. It is quite sort of football manager career, I'm afraid, in that he starts as at 4th tier level. He wins a promotion. He then gets a job as the assistant at a larger club higher up the pyramid. He does that for a couple of years and learns the ropes at a higher level. He then gets the job at Värnamo, who are a very small Swedish club that at that point had just been promoted to the top tier. He took them in the top tier and led them to a very impressive finish in the Allsvenskan. Off the back of that, he gets the job at Hammarby, one of the bigger clubs in Sweden. And he leads Hammarby to their highest finishes in ages. 2 second-place finishes back-to-back for a club that hadn't finished second for well over a decade up to that point. Now, extra context is always important, and I've spoken to a friend of ours who's a bit more of an expert on Swedish football, lives out there, says actually the latest second-place finish in the season that just ended was seen as a bit of a missed opportunity for Hammarby, if only because Malmo, who've been dominating Swedish football, was suddenly rubbish this year, finished miles off it, and Hammarby didn't win the league, having been runners-up to Malmo previously. Instead, it was won by a kind of Leicester-esque surprise winner in Mjällby. And so there is a little bit of a missed opportunity feeling as Hellberg leaves Hammarby. He took them into European football as well, and by all accounts, just has to be seen as having had a very, very significant success as a young coach in the Allsvenskan across 2 different clubs in the last 3 seasons. So it's no surprise that he's moved over to the UK. And what type of manager is he? Style of play? Well, looking at the data will show you that Hammarby had the highest ball possession in the Allsvenskan. They took the most shots in the league. They faced the fewest shots in the league. These are good, very basic data points, but positive ones. Good defensive numbers, which is part of the kind of ideal of a high possession-based style, is not just to create loads of chances and dominate territory, but also to make sure that you restrict the opposition's time spent attacking your box and attacking your goal. He clearly coached a really good team. I think that's clear. 2 good teams, in fact. And I think, like, watching some clips of the sorts of goals that they scored, when it's working, the ball speed, the energy, really impressive. This wasn't necessarily slow possession-based stuff. It was again what's always held up as, like, you want possession of the ball, but you want to move it quickly. I think at their best, they absolutely did that, Hammarby, under Hellberg. So that's the best case scenario of what Hellberg will bring to Middlesbrough. Needless to say, this is a very, very different league, and it doesn't always track that managers can come in and implement exactly the same style of play in a different league against different opposition, trying different things with different types of players. I actually, as coincidence would have it, went to a Hammarby game late 2024. It was the derby against Djurgårdens. Hellberg was manager. Hammarby were winning that game comfortably and clearly the better side, and impressive on the day before the Djurgårdens fans threw so many firecrackers on the pitch that the match got abandoned. I didn't go there with an analytical hat on to watch the tactics of the man in the dugout. I went there to drink beers and eat herring, so I'm not going to pretend that I came away from that as a Hellberg expert. But I will say I'm excited about this appointment. I think from a Borough point of view, and this is something that we talk about a lot, George, is what they've not done here is go, okay, we're second in the league after 15 games. We really, really, really want to win promotion this season, and an appointment that would be less risky than some appointments would be to just appoint someone that's been in this position before and therefore broadly understands what may or may not happen and knows the league and or has a promotion on their CV. That's the sort of appointment that can be presented as one with less risk. Whether it's true that those appointments have any more success than others is definitely up for debate, but that's how it's presented, as one with less risk, fewer unknowns, right? This appointment of Hellberg has more unknowns, and Borough's approach has been, let's hire the manager that we think, if we provide this head coach with the right situation, the right support, maybe a bit of Adi Vivash in the dugout to help him, maybe a good sporting director and decent recruitment and a squad that we think is half decent and good facilities, maybe this guy might have the highest ceiling as a coach, the best case scenario. We might have a coaching phenom, a Swedish coaching prodigy as our manager. That's what they are hoping happens here. And George, it's a fascinating appointment for all those reasons.
Yeah, it is. And it's going to underpin the rest of this show. But you touched on there one of my biggest pet hates, which is around the perception of risk and what is a risk and what isn't a risk. And there seems to be this idea that experience makes you less of a risk and managing in England makes you less of a risk. And I can find very few examples of evidence for that to be the case. I think in Hellberg you have somebody whose career is on a massive upward curve, whose style of play should appease the fans, because we know that certainly under Michael Carrick there were times where Borough results weren't necessarily bad, but the style of football towards the end was perceived as being relatively stale. And you've almost kind of got to take something of a risk or a bit of a leap of faith when it comes to trying to find any kind of recruitment and trying to gain any kind of margin in recruitment. But in Hellberg, you've got someone who's managed a lot of games of football, and we're going to talk about other guys who haven't necessarily done that. So I don't really buy this being a risky appointment, or any more risky than going out and hiring somebody who's succeeded at this level and also failed at this level. He is someone who, as of yet, hasn't failed, as we've seen at Will Still and Southampton. That is also by no means a guarantee of success. But I'm excited to see this. Of all the appointments, this is the one that I'm most intrigued and excited by.
Yeah, and of course the unknowns when you do hire someone that you haven't seen manage at this level before are things around the tactics of the league and how transferable one style is to another. We don't know for sure if he will try and implement the same style as he's implemented. We shouldn't just assume that. We often do assume that managers only have one way of playing, and it's fair to say that generally there are central kind of tenets, if you like, that managers and head coaches do fall back on. The footballing culture is different. The culture of those in the dressing room may be a bit different. The league strength is certainly different in terms of the breadth of quality across your average championship club versus the kind of variety that there is in the Allsvenskan. And then there's the fact that, if this is a guy that's going to try and play in a significantly different way or a marginally different way, is joining mid-season the best scenario for that? Trying to put in a lot of new coaching principles while adapting to a new league and moving to a new country on a personal level, that's obviously a challenge for him. But it's a great job for Hellberg to take. I think much better than the Swansea job for him to take. There's obviously the kind of potential narrative of if Borough finish third or below, so anywhere lower than they are now, whether there might be people that suggest that Hellberg has therefore underwhelmed or taken the team downwards. The fact is they are more likely to finish third or below than they are second and above right now, so that wouldn't necessarily be a fair criticism, but I think we could see that one coming if it does. So we'll get into, after his first game, we'll take a look at the team, see who he's prioritised, see which players we think might look good or might struggle, winners and losers of the Hellberg appointment. But for now, George, let's move on and talk about Southampton. What's going on there?
Tonda Eckert is still in charge at Southampton, who is the interim manager. There were reports about 5 days or so ago that he was in his native Germany, that he was set to be given the job full time. It looks like there's a wide of the mark. It looks like it's more a case of him coming in as interim, Southampton winning 2 games of football, and everyone being like, okay, that's a good thing. We can now just breathe and chill, and our fans aren't going to be hammering down the door to insist that we make an appointment relatively quickly. I think that was also helped by the fact that the only really solid link to a manager that was seemingly in the process of, at the very least, speaking to Southampton was Gary O'Neill, and the fans made their feelings about that very, very clear during the 3-1 win over Sheffield Wednesday by swearing at him in collective unison and telling him where to go. And I'm pretty sure that message to the Southampton board is twofold. A, it was, please don't hire Gary O'Neill, but B, probably also that gives him a bit of time and a bit of wiggle room to not rush into an appointment too. So I'll be pretty surprised if he gets the job on a longer term basis. I initially assumed when I saw his name as the interim that he had joined in the summer, thought that he was part of Will Still's kind of backroom staff, but it doesn't really seem to be the case. He was assistant manager previously at I think Genoa, where he had some success. He was
Genoa, for context, I think part of the same ownership group. The kind of
yes,
they're a relative, if you like, in ownership terms with Southampton. So I think maybe that was, did well there, and they thought, hello, let's get
already
into
in the building.
Yeah.
And was brought in as under 21 manager, which in itself I think is probably the kind of promotion that would suggest that they might see him as a potential head coach in the future. We know that Southampton are seemingly, or are supposed to be, very, very data driven and data savvy, and I'd be pretty surprised if what they have seen in those 2 games from Southampton has kind of persuaded them to make Eckert the manager. They will be fully aware that the underlying numbers under Still were pretty good, and that realistically whoever came in and managed Saints would probably continue that in the short term, and they would due a couple of wins, which they duly got. I've seen, I mentioned on the pod after the QPR game, I think it was, that I wasn't sure that Eckert had done too much. We got a few responses saying yes, he has, he's done this and he's done that. Obviously he's going to impact he's going to want the players to play a little bit differently, and we saw them relinquish possession over when they were ahead against Wednesday to a remarkable degree that we never would have seen previously. What I more meant is I don't necessarily think that the wins are due to Eckert's coaching ability and what he's done. It's natural for us to take results and immediately say, right, this team won, what did they do well? This team lost, what did they do badly? But this is a very specific case, I think, with Southampton, where they were doing lots right when they were losing games. And this would be the biggest red flag possible to me in terms of giving him the job now, because certainly in the underlying numbers, not much has changed. So it'll be intriguing to see what happens there over the next couple of weeks if we see names being linked. It's been an international break where you'd think they would do the crux of their work on this, but basically in the 5 days since they, since it was confirmed that Eckert would be staying on as interim boss, there's been very, very little in terms of news. They got Charlton away next, then they host Leicester, and then go to Millwall. And those are probably the 3 games that Eckert will be judged on. And if they do, if they pick up, say, 7 points from those 3 games, maybe he will get the job full time. But it still feels, and the reports locally suggest, there is still a recruitment process underway at Southampton. We just have no idea what is going on.
Worked under Val Ishmael at Barnsley when they made the playoffs. Did young? God, he must have been very young then. He's only 32 now. Born in 1993. Can you believe it? The passage of time. Norwich City, they have appointed Philippe Clement. As mentioned, this was a lovely little subplot storyline of the soap opera. Was Norwich sort of... were they going to appoint Gary O'Neill? Were they going to appoint Yondell Thomason, perhaps? Were they going to be interested in former player Russell Martin? No. They were going to appoint someone, and we didn't know who it was until quite close to the actual unveiling. Philippe Clement. Philippe Clement on a 3.5-year contract. I know contract length doesn't really mean anything, but I think sometimes managers get 12-month rollers. And he's got a 3.5-er. So what does that mean? You decide. Philippe Clement has most recently been the manager of Rangers. And previously, his managerial career is... well, that's what's got him this job, basically. If you take the Rangers context, from what I understand, I've seen a few Rangers fans kind of weighing in. Some of them don't like him very much. Some of them think he was a bit hard done by. Some of them think he was rubbish. Some of them think that basically anyone would have done similarly, and that sort of forces acting against him in terms of how the club is run, brackets poorly, and the recruitment meant that the club was a bit of a mess, and realistically beating Celtic to a title was unlikely. And so he just did about par. I think they had some pretty good performances in European football. And what's interesting is that tactically, I saw a Rangers fan who was talking to Pinken, a local Norwich site and paper and podcast, basically suggesting that he felt, and we often say about Celtic and Rangers and any players or managers coming from those clubs specifically in Scotland, that the games that they play, the football matches that they play compared to championship teams is completely incomparable. It's essentially a different sport, or at least a very different challenge. And the suggestion from the Rangers fan that I heard was that actually Clement's style of management possibly wasn't that well suited to being the guy that sets up a team to dominate possession and territory and happily have 70% possession and do so in a way that sees them, hit utopia in that style, dominate the ball, score loads of goals, keep the ball miles away from their goal at all times. Hence why, I suppose, if that was the general consensus, hence why they appointed Russell Martin to try and be the manager that would do that. That didn't go very well. But basically, low block breakdown, possible weakness. But, and this is where I'm feeling quite good about things, more open games, more transition-based games, more like tete-a-tete games, I guess, to speak in his mother tongue, would be where he kind of comes out or has come out pretty well. Whether that's European games where Rangers were going toe-to-toe with opposition that were trying to beat them a bit more than they had at domestic football, or whether it was back in Belgium where he has had a pretty sensational career, you have to say. He won the Belgian League 3 years in a row, first with Genk, then with Club Bruges back-to-back. What else can I tell you? Looks like he's had a pretty good record with strikers, which is good news for Josh Sargent, I would suggest. Ben Yedder he did very well with at Monaco, where he finished 6th. He took Monaco from 6th to 3rd when he came in halfway through one season, and then finished 6th in his second season, which I think was a little bit of an underwhelming finish. But with Ben Yedder, with Dessers, with Bas Dost, with others as well, quite good goal-scoring record. Looks like a 4 at the back guy, so I think, and I kind of hope, that Norwich will be locking in a back 4 and kind of building from there. I'm excited to see how this looks. I'm excited to see a freshness to their play. There are so many Norwich players, I think, when you look at their squad, who we haven't talked about positively at all this season, barely any single Norwich player. But there are loads of players that, fast forward 2 months, if things are going well, I can already hear myself saying on a Monday pod, like, yeah, he's really come to the fore and actually looks like a really interesting player. I can kind of see what they were thinking when they signed him. And injuries haven't helped Liam Manning, and those are, things that he'll have to deal with. But I'm looking at, Darling +1 at centre-back, and I'd like him to see... Well, he needs to work out whether that's going to be Medic or Duffy or maybe McConville with Cordoba out injured at the moment. I think at right back with Stacey and Fisher, he's got a good situation. Left back, they've got 3, but they're all either fit or unfit or unavailable. Mahovo, Christine and Schlupp. Loads of central midfield options, and we'll work out what he prioritises in those. Topic, McLean, Jacob Wright, Forson's back from injury, Pelle Matson, Liam Gibbs. And then at the top of the pitch, Kvistgaarden scored that nice goal in the last game, and it'd be great to see him get a run of games playing off of Sargent. Schwartau's done okay off the left. Makama's done, I'd say, really well off the right. Sinach and Diallo are injured, other wide forwards. So it's a question of whether he, unlike Manning, can get more out of Marcondes, Jurasek, players like that, or whether they're just not at the level right now. We will find out. But I'm interested in this appointment. I'm pretty up for it. Philippe Clement, Norwich City. Be good to hear from some Norwich fans what you think, positive or negative, in the comments on YouTube or on Spotify. That leads us to Swansea, George, who I'd suggest, the tragic persona in this case, to a certain extent, in that it appears they've been gazumped, they've been jilted. And I must admit, even when they sacked Sheehan, with these 3 other clubs already having sacked their managers, I made a point on a video we did for Dragon Sports that putting yourself in a position where you're looking for a manager at the same time as 3 richer clubs for this level, who can probably offer larger packages, who can arguably offer better squads and better or similar facilities, I would argue being what I would consider the least attractive job out of the 4 was always going to be suboptimal when you're fishing in the same pool broadly of managers. And, maybe it's outcome bias, but I think it's kind of proven it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Well, it's an interesting one with Swansea because that is the perception, and I do wonder about their financial clout given the takeover that went through relatively recently. My perception is that they are a club who certainly have ambitions and financial clout probably beyond the previous regime, and far beyond where they are in the league table.
We'll ask you to spend 10 minutes post-recording just going through their losses posted over the last few years and PSR thresholds, which I haven't seen much about, but in my own research suggests that PSR-wise Swansea are unlikely to be in a position to spend another 10-15 mil next summer unless they make big sales.
Absolutely. No, I get that. And also in reflect of the other clubs we're talking about, there is still clearly a gap anyway. Specifically with Southampton with their parachute payments, but I guess my point is more that the ambition maybe that Swansea City fans expected to see their new owner show, especially in light of having appointed from within in the summer, means that Vitor Matos, who is yet to be confirmed, but is seemingly soon to be confirmed as their new head coach or manager, is being seen as really underwhelming. Now, Matos is a guy who was signed by Liverpool, another career coach who was signed by Liverpool, having coached in China, having coached in Porto in their youth teams, and he was brought in at Liverpool as elite development coach in 2019 and then left with the rest of Jurgen Klopp's staff in 2024. He then went and assisted Pep Linders over at Red Bull Salzburg, which didn't go particularly well. And then in the summer, so only a couple of months ago, became manager of Marítimo in the second tier of Portuguese football, where they've had a pretty good start to the season. Now, very talented young coaches are seemingly the most sought after managers in the Championship right now. And again, as I said early on in the show, I would really, really dissuade fans from seeing this profile of manager and think, what a massive risk, what are we doing? Because, again, there is plenty of evidence to show in recent times across the EFL, even down into League Two, that rookie managers, young managers can do very well, and perceived experienced, wily managers can do really poorly. It is I've written about this for NTT20 many times. It's a myth to think that there is the level of risk is much smaller when it comes to those who are seen to be proven. Having said that, this appointment concerns me for quite a few reasons, none of which, I'm not going to pretend to have any idea about him and his style of play. I'm sure he's nailed the interview and that's why he's got this job. I'm sure his references are stellar. I'm sure, people at Swansea have spoken to Pep Linders, would have spoken to Jurgen Klopp, will have heard rave reviews about him as a guy and as a coach, and I'm not denying that at all. It's more a cultural thing and the position that Swansea find themselves in right now, where, to my mind, firstly, they hired Sheehan rather than the options available to them, including Hellberg, and that is now seen by the fan base as being a huge mistake from the owners, despite, at the time, the results being okay. But the mistake that they're perceived to have made was hiring someone who had no managerial experience. And therefore, they are effectively doing it again, hiring a guy with 13 league games in Portugal. And, bringing in a young manager into a relegation battle, because that's what Swansea are in right now, with a fan base who are already upset about his arrival, is a huge red flag to me, because he is going to be given such little time to implement his ideas, and it's just not going to be a very conducive atmosphere or environment for a guy to learn on the job and to implement his ideas and get across what he wants to do. Secondly, I think the only area where I would say a certain profile of manager would suit is down towards the bottom end of the Championship, where the way to stay up and the way that Swansea are going to improve, they specifically need to improve in forward areas where their current attacking output is really, really poor. They're really struggling to get the ball in the box consistently. But there is a profile of manager that, Rowett being a key example of this, who can suffocate games, who has learned how to take teams with small budgets and find ways to stay in games and be very, very hard to beat. Whereas bringing in a younger guy into this particular job, this particular challenge, it resembles a little bit with me, even though they're very different profiles, of what Luton did last season with Matt Bloomfield, where it's an appointment that doesn't suggest to me that the Swansea hierarchy accept the position that they're in. It's an ideological hire that would have made sense in the summer, not a hire when you are, according to basically any metric, one of the poorest teams in the league right now. And Luton paid the price for that with relegation by hiring a bright young thing who was up and coming through the EFL. Matos obviously could come in and be a fantastic manager and turn them around very quickly. And we saw Miran Muslic last season at Argyle, even though Argyle got relegated, as a young manager who came in from another league, albeit with vastly more experience than Matos. Or at least more experience is the wrong word, at least more data to go off, given the jobs they'd previously managed and the levels that he managed at previously. And even though Argyle came down, he very clearly improved them to a massive degree. So I'm kind of deliberately contradicting myself, where normally I would think the criticism that comes the way of managers, of clubs around hiring unproven and inexperienced are unfair. But in this very specific role, where I think part of the need in this managerial hire would be to appease a fan base, to kind of reunite everybody with a new ownership group where the fans are losing faith quickly, missing out on Hellberg and replacing him with someone who, there's basically no data to go off, and you assume has basically secured this job off the back of references, an interview, and an incredibly small sample size of data. Alarm bells ringing here, and I'm excited. But I'm excited to see it. Let's see what he's about.
I think what's interesting is, as you say, and it is tempting for all humans to do on a number of different spheres, but specifically when it comes to football managers, to kind of put them all into buckets, and anyone that's young and maybe foreign or maybe hasn't had a stellar professional career, pop them in the same bucket. But to your point, and what I think is really important, is that Hellberg has managed hundreds of games and Matos has managed 12 games at senior level. So when you're running a head coach search, and we have been, albeit very removed as part of the consultancy work that we did for a year or so, we have been involved in these situations, in head coach hires situations for Championship clubs, for League Two clubs. And obviously you have names thrown at you left, right, centre, from agents and from people within the game who are putting forward their mates and getting in touch. It's an incredibly contacts-based industry still. You will often have, and this is part of the reason why we were involved in our work with 21st Group, you will probably have a data-driven shortlist some data scientists have kind of spat out a list based on various metrics that you say that you are prioritising, and that could be style of play stuff, it could be playing young players, it could be just success versus budget. Those are, I would say, are the three sort of general ones as I recall. And you'll probably have your own list internally, and that could be based on whatever happened last time you were doing a head coach search, which invariably will have been in the sort of preceding 2 years at some point. So that's what I find really interesting about Swansea's situation specifically, and I've kind of mentioned why I thought them looking for a manager at this exact moment with the other three Championship clubs looking for it at the same time seemed suboptimal to me. What I also find really interesting is that Swansea are in a situation where the director of football, Richard Montague, was let go just after the transfer window in early September. It was a surprise departure, and they specifically said we're not looking to replace our director of football. So that means that the CEO, Tom Gorringe, and then a guy called Adam Worth, who is, I think title is the head of recruitment, who's someone that came into the club from a betting background. This is the first job that he's ever had within football, and only the first year or maybe ticking into his second year of being involved with Swansea. I think, has been sort of presented as a really data-driven analytics player recruitment specialist. And so if those are the two running things, and I'm sure the owners are having an input as well, but again, ideally, I'm not sure this isn't old school chairman making hires. Generally, you want a structure where there are people managing these, and they're probably not the owners. They've just hired a kind of head of scouting from Celtic, but I think that was just coincidence that it came around the same time as Sheehan. As I understand it, that during the last head coach hire, when Swansea hired Sheehan and had potentially lined up Kim Hellberg, it's been rumoured that Rich Montague was kind of the Hellberg guy that presented him, and the club ended up going with Sheehan, and he ultimately did enough in his interim spell and with his relationships within the club to get that job full time. And with Montague then leaving at the start of September, I don't think it's a huge stretch to suggest that they went back to Hellberg because he was top of their list last time. He's jilted them, and then they're kind of back at square one. At least that's how I kind of see it. And I'm sure there's plenty more nuance to things like this, but I do think they're a really fascinating club at the moment, Swansea City, and this is, for all the reasons you've flagged, like a really important hire for them to make. I think it's early enough in the season that I think there's an argument to be made that that just because you're not playing poorly and you are, in terms of league position and points, like in and around the relegation zone, that you shouldn't necessarily be going for the firefighter in November. It's almost too early for the firefighter role to a certain extent. But then we saw with, as you mentioned, Luton, I would suggest Bristol Rovers, albeit in League One last season. You also see teams get really caught out when they make the kind of long-term philosophy hire as well. And they forget that they have to pick up results in the short term. It's an interesting one on that front.
It's more the case where, this is a guy who has never stood in a dugout and had loads of 20,000 fans screaming at him. This is a guy who's never had to face up to the press in the middle of as a team dips into the relegation zone and asked, how are you going to sort this out? And coupled with the fact that that there just isn't very much evidence and data around managerial ability to go off. That's why it's no reflection on him at all, because he might be brilliant. It's more just timing. Like, is it fair to ask a guy to come in with his elite level coaching experience and be like, right, it's mid-November, we're shit, sort us out? Like, is that he's never done that before. yeah, I'd be a bit concerned. Like, I'm not suggesting full firefighter, but just someone who is there's just more evidence at hand as to what they are capable of doing, and B, someone who's just felt that heat before, I guess, and is able to do it. Like, as an Oxford fan, last season with Rowett, part of the massive reason I think why we stayed up was because when we had a terrible run under him towards the back end of the season, he was so calm. When everyone else was freaking out and losing their mind, he was just like, yeah, it's all right. You know, we've lost a few games, but we're probably going to win one soon, and then we'll be fine. And then we did, and we were fine. Like, it's because he's been there and he's done it a lot. Like, it's so rare that I value the whole experience thing. But in this very specific case, it's not managerial experience. I think is the key thing. It's just circumstance. It's probably going to be just a totally different experience to anything he's ever experienced before, and that is a risk in itself.
Yeah, feeling the heat. I like that analogy. Having said, not necessarily a firefighter, but someone that's felt the heat before. One of those people that goes and watches fires burn. At least someone with a health and safety certificate of some kind, I think. Well, that's been really interesting. I mean, literally the last thing to say is that could have been talking about a fifth club. I know there were some Ipswich fans who were a little concerned that Kieran McKenna might be the next Celtic manager. As of this morning, it sort of doesn't look like he will be, and that maybe if that was going to happen, maybe it would already have happened. But there was enough there to, there was enough links, and maybe he supports Celtic, maybe he doesn't. No one really seems to know, that sort of thing. But Kieran McKenna is the Ipswich manager. All other Championship managers are intact, and yeah, what a week of Championship action we've got ahead.
For now.
Triple game week, basically. Well, Saturday, midweek Saturday. And it'll be good to break down the weekend's games and the first games, certainly for Clement, possibly for Hellberg, who's not been appointed as we record, and who knows who else on the Monday pod. And also just nice to be able to have add a bit more depth and time to these discussions, which often are hard to have on the Monday pod with all the games to go through. Certainly gives food for thought, George, about a potential for a kind of midweek chatter episode, sort of newsy chatter. Maybe that's something we can...
Not the back pages. Comes back. There you go.
Who would be interested in an extra NTT20 offering called Not the Back Pages? Let us know in the comments. Any ideas you have for us, we're always all ears. Thanks for listening. Go well.